3 years I've been Peters Van Dyck's wife. That's the truth of living with a man like him. You learn to navigate the space between his two worlds, present but never quite knowing which version you'll wake up to. My hands adjust silk ties that cost more than some people's monthly rent, pour coffee into imported porcelain he barely notices, and arrange his schedule around meetings I'm not supposed to ask about. The penthouse sprawls across the top 3 floors of a Manhattan high-rise, all floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist luxury that overlooks a city Peters owns in ways the deed never shows. Peters Van Dyck himself is a study in contradictions I've learned to read. I recognize his footsteps, confident, purposeful, and know whether he's coming from legitimate business or the other kind. I catch him in doorways, dark hair slicked back with precision, tailored suits that whisper wealth, and gray-blue eyes that shift between tender and terrifying depending on who's in the room. He holds conference calls with shipping executives in the morning, then hosts whispered meetings with men who leave through the private elevator at night. I sit across from him at dinner, discussing gallery exhibitions and charity galas, while his phone lights up with messages he doesn't explain. I don't push for answers. That's not how this works. My role is to be the curator of normalcy, the respectable wife who gives his empire a civilized face. The only person who sees through it all is Emma, my best friend since college, 31 years old with a journalism degree she barely uses and a sharp eye for the truth I'm avoiding. She meets me for brunch at overpriced cafes in Soho, and every time her concern deepens. "You look tired, Sharon," she said last Sunday, studying me over her mimosa with that particular intensity only old friends can manage. "Like you're not sleeping." "I'm fine." "You always say that." She reached across the table, her voice dropping. "But you're married to a man whose business associates end up in the Hudson River. How fine can you actually be?" "But I am fine. I have to be. Because the alternative, admitting I'm married to someone whose world operates by rules I pretend not to see, means confronting choices I made 3 years ago when I said "I do" to a man with blood under his manicured fingernails. Tonight, I'm attending the Children's Hospital Charity Gala alone. Peters has business that couldn't wait, the kind I've learned not to ask about. The kind that means he'll come home after midnight, take a shower that runs too long, and slide into bed beside me with an apology whispered against my hair. I stand in our bedroom now, Friday evening, fastening diamond earrings he gave me on our first anniversary. 5 carats total, worth more than my father made in a year before he died. Through the reflection in the mirror, I see Peters emerge from his closet, adjusting cufflinks. His knuckles are bruised, fresh, purpling at the edges. He catches me noticing. "Everything okay?" I ask carefully, the same question I've asked 100 times. "Everything's fine." The same answer he always gives. He crosses to me, presses a kiss to my temple. "You look beautiful." "I'm sorry I can't go with you tonight." "It's okay. I understand." But I don't. Not really. And as I watch him leave through our private elevator, the one that doesn't go through the lobby, I realize I've been understanding for 3 years without ever demanding the truth. The car service picks me up at 7. The gala starts at 8. And somewhere between those 2 hours, my carefully maintained ignorance is going to shatter in a parking garage, leaving me bleeding on concrete while Peter's world comes crashing into mine with the force of fists and the question that will change everything. Who did this to you? Before we dive into the night that changed everything, hit that subscribe button, because this story gets darker, more intense, and you won't want to miss how far Peters will go when someone touches what's his. The gala ended at 10:47 p.m. I checked my phone for the last time before it happened. 3 missed calls from Peters, all within the last hour. The ballroom was emptying, champagne-drunk donors collecting their coats while I made my final rounds, thanking sponsors with the practiced smile I'd perfected over 3 years of playing the respectable Mrs. Van Dyck. My driver wasn't at the designated spot. I stood under the hotel awning, rain beginning to fall, and felt the first flutter of unease. Tony was never late. I texted him. No response. Called. Straight to voicemail. The parking garage then. My backup plan. I'd driven myself to enough events to know where the valet kept my spare keys. The elevator descended into fluorescent-lit concrete that smelled like oil and exhaust. My heels clicked against the floor, each step echoing too loudly in the emptiness. Level P3. My black Mercedes SUV sat where I'd left it that morning, a lifetime ago, when I'd still believed the worst thing about tonight would be making small talk with pharmaceutical executives. I was 10 feet from the driver's door when they stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. 2 men, Irish accents. The taller one smiled, and everything in my body screamed, "Run." Mrs. Van Dyke. Not a question, a confirmation. Your husband sends his regards. You have the wrong person. The first punch came from the side, catching my cheekbone with enough force to snap my head sideways. Pain exploded white-hot behind my eyes. I staggered, tried to scream, but a hand clamped over my mouth, arm wrapping around my waist, lifting me off my feet. "Tell Peters," the tall one said, his face inches from mine. The Irish remember him. Then they went to work. Fists, ribs, my head slamming against concrete when they dropped me. The taste of copper flooding my mouth, rain mixing with blood, my designer gown shredded and ruined. One heel snapped off during the struggle. Somewhere distant, I heard myself begging, "Please stop, please." But the words came out wrong, distorted through split lips and broken dignity. They left me conscious. That was deliberate. I needed to be awake to deliver the message. I don't know how long I lay there on the garage floor, rain drumming against the concrete ramp entrance, city lights blurring through tears, and the swelling that had already closed my left eye halfway. Every breath felt like knives in my ribs. My hands shook violently when I finally pushed myself upright. The world tilting sickeningly, the spare keys, still in my clutch, somehow. I dragged myself to the SUV, left a smear of blood on the door handle, collapsed into the driver's seat, started the ignition with shaking, bloody hands, and drove home to tell my husband that his world had finally crashed into mine with the force of fists and a message I was never supposed to have to deliver. I made it through the penthouse door before my legs gave out. The foyer's marble floor rushed up to meet me, cool against my cheek, and somewhere in the distance I heard shouting. Security. Peters kept 2 men on rotation outside our private elevator, and now they were crouching beside me, one speaking rapidly into his radio, while the other tried to assess damage with hands that hovered uncertainly over my ruined body. "Mrs. Van Dyke, can you hear me? Don't move. We're calling... No hospitals." My voice came out wrong, thick with blood and split lips. "Peters, I need Peters." He arrived within minutes, the elevator doors opening to reveal my husband still in his business suit, tie loosened, and for one frozen moment, he just stared. I watched his face transform, shock bleeding into something cold and lethal that made my breath catch despite the pain. Then he was beside me, gathering me into his arms with shocking gentleness, carrying me through the penthouse to our master bathroom. He set me on the marble counter, hands shaking only when they touched my injuries, his gray-blue eyes cataloging every bruise, every cut, every visible violation. "Who did this to you?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried more menace than any scream could have. Each word fell like a stone into still water, creating ripples of dread that spread through the room. I told him, 2 men, Irish accents, parking garage. The words tumbled out between gasps as he cleaned blood from my face with expensive whiskey that burned like fire. When I repeated their message, "Tell Peters the Irish remember him," his jaw tightened incrementally, the only visible sign of the rage building behind his terrifying calm. He pulled out his phone. 1 call. "Everyone. Now. I want names by dawn." That's when I saw it. The full scope of what Peters Van Dyke commanded. Within minutes, our penthouse filled with men I'd never met. Security, enforcers, strategists. A man Peters called Henrik appeared, tall and Dutch and efficient, already pulling up security footage on a tablet while coordinating with what sounded like a small army. Peters never left my side. He bandaged my ribs with hands that had probably broken bones, pressed ice to my swollen face, murmured apologies against my hair. I should have been there. I'll never forgive myself. How many men will die because of me? I asked, watching him work, watching his empire mobilize through our bedroom doorway. He met my eyes, and I saw the man I'd married and the monster he'd always been, existing simultaneously in the same body. Every single one who thought you were a message they could send. His hand cupped my face, careful of the bruising. By morning, they'll all wish they'd killed you instead. And despite everything, the pain, the fear, the horror of what was coming, I believed him. Dawn came with a list of 17 names. I watched from Peter's study as Henrik spread photographs across the desk, surveillance captures, police records, social media screenshots assembled with terrifying efficiency in less than 6 hours. The O'Reilly brothers, Connor and Liam, stared up from grainy parking garage footage. Henrik's finger tapped the taller one. Liam, confirmed at the scene. Connor was lookout. And above them? Peters stood behind his desk, suit jacket discarded, sleeves rolled to his elbows, looking every inch the tactician I'd never fully seen before. Declan Byrne, Irish boss trying to push into your shipping routes. This was a message. Test your response time, see if you've gone soft. Henrik's Dutch accent clipped the words with precision. He's miscalculated badly. Peters laid out strategy like he was planning a corporate acquisition. Isolate the brothers, extract confirmation, climb the chain until they reached Byrne. His network spanned continents, shipping manifests that hid contraband, port authorities on payroll from Amsterdam to New York, legitimate business providing cover for an empire I'd pretended not to see. I want to know? I said from the leather chair where Peters had positioned me, ice pack against my ribs. Both men turned. Everything. No more protecting me through ignorance. Peter's expression shifted. Surprise, then something like respect. He crossed to me, crouched to eye level. Sharon, they beat me in a parking garage to send you a message. I'm already in this. I deserve to know the truth. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded once. Henrik, bring her up to speed. The doctor arrived at 7, Dr. Kaminsky, 60s. On Peter's payroll for situations where hospitals ask too many questions. 2 cracked ribs, facial contusions that would purple spectacularly, mild concussion. He wrapped my torso, prescribed painkillers, left through the private elevator without filing any paperwork. By 9 a.m., Henrik's phone buzzed. We have Liam O'Reilly, pulled from his girlfriend's apartment in Queens 20 minutes ago. My hands clenched on the chair arms. I want to see him. No. Peter's voice was flat, absolute. I want to see him, the one who did this. Sharon, you don't need to. I need to look him in the eye. I stood despite my ribs screaming protest. You're hunting them because of me. I won't hide while you do it. Peters and Henrik exchanged a look I couldn't read. Finally, Peters exhaled slowly. You stay behind me. You don't speak unless I tell you to. Understood? Understood. Word was already spreading through the underworld. Declan Byrne knew Peters Van Dyke was hunting. The Irish operation had gone to ground, scattered across the city's boroughs, buying time that would only make the reckoning more brutal when it came. Every hour they delayed meant more casualties in the crossfire. But Peters was methodical, patient, brilliant in his brutality, and I couldn't close my eyes without seeing fists coming toward my face, couldn't breathe without tasting copper and rain. So I watched my husband wage war and learned exactly what kind of man I'd married. Liam O'Reilly looked smaller, zip-tied to that chair. The warehouse space Peters used for situations like this was industrial and anonymous. Concrete floors, soundproofed walls, a single bare bulb swinging overhead. Liam's face was already bloodied from Henrik's initial questioning, but his eyes went wide when I walked in behind Peters. "Look at what you did." My voice didn't shake. That surprised me. I stepped closer, forcing him to see the bruises purpling my face, the way I held my ribs when I breathed. "Look at me." "Jesus Christ," Liam started, but Peters moved between us with predatory grace. "You're going to tell me everything," Peters said, his tone conversational, almost pleasant. "Who gave the order? Where Byrne is? Every detail of your operation. And you're going to do it quickly, because my wife is watching, and I'd prefer she not see what happens if you waste my time." I watched Peters work. No rage, no violence yet, just methodical questions asked in that terrifyingly calm voice while Liam crumbled. Byrne had ordered it. Teach Van Dyke a lesson, show him the Irish weren't afraid. Connor had been lookout. They were supposed to scare me, hurt me enough to send a message but not kill me. "It's business," Liam gasped when Peter's hand closed around his throat. "Nothing personal, just business." "You made it personal when you put your hands on me," I said, and both men looked at me. "You left me bleeding on concrete to send a message to my husband. That's as personal as it gets." Peters released Liam, stepped back, his gaze on me now instead of the prisoner. "You shouldn't be here for what comes next." "I'm not leaving. I'm part of this whether you like it or not." Henrik appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, his expression grim. "Connor O'Reilly just turned up dead in Brooklyn. Single shot to the head. Professional." He looked at Peters. "Byrne's cleaning house. Doesn't want witnesses." Peters' jaw tightened. "Message delivered to our front company an hour ago. Says, and I quote, 'Your wife, my problem.'" The temperature in the room dropped. Peters turned back to Liam with an expression that made the Irishman whimper. "Give me Byrne's location, now, or you'll wish Declan had shot you first." Liam talked. Everything. Safe houses, operation schedules, Byrne's inner circle. When he finished, Peters looked at me. "Say the word. I'll have you taken home." I thought about the parking garage, the taste of blood, the way they'd laughed while I begged. I thought about what it meant to be Peters Van Dyke's wife, not the fantasy version I'd performed at charity galas, but the reality standing in this warehouse. "I'm already home," I said quietly. "Right here with you." Henrik caught Peter's eye, nodded toward me with something like approval. "She's stronger than you give her credit for." War had been declared, and I wasn't running from it anymore. 48 hours. That's how long it took for the body count to reach double digits. Irish operations burned across 3 boroughs, warehouses in Queens, a front restaurant in Brooklyn, a gambling den in the Bronx. Peters orchestrated it from our penthouse, transformed our living room into a war room with laptops, burner phones, and men coming and going at all hours. I healed physically. The swelling in my face reduced to yellowish shadows. Breathing hurt less. But I couldn't stop watching Peters conduct systematic destruction with the precision of a surgeon removing cancer. The media called it gang violence escalating. Channel 7 showed footage of firefighters battling blazes, reporters speculating about turf wars while carefully avoiding names. Peters watched the coverage expressionlessly, then made another call that would send more of Byrne's people running. My phone buzzed. Emma. I stared at her name for 3 rings before answering. "Sharon, oh my God, are you safe? The news is showing. There's violence all over the city. Should you leave? Come stay with me?" "Everything's fine," I lied, watching Peters across the room point at a map while Henrik nodded. "We're nowhere near any of that." "But Peters, his business, doesn't he—" She stopped. We both knew she was asking if my husband was behind it. "I have to go. I'll call you later." I hung up before she could push further and felt something inside me close like a door. My old life, My old friendships, they couldn't exist in this world, not anymore. Peters barely slept. I'd wake at 3 a.m. to find him still working, reviewing surveillance footage, coordinating with associates in Amsterdam. I brought him coffee, food he barely touched, positioned myself on the couch nearby reviewing the same security feeds. "You don't have to do this," he said one night, exhaustion roughening his voice. "What do you need from me?" I asked instead of arguing. He looked at me for a long moment, then started explaining. Burns' patterns, his known associates, territories they controlled. Peters initially resisted, including me, then something shifted. He began sharing intel, asking my perspective on decisions that would end lives. I noticed it on the third night, a pattern in Burns' movements between safe houses, predictable timing that Peters had missed. "There," I said, pointing at the screen. "He's rotating every 6 hours. You could intercept him here." Henrik looked over my shoulder, then at Peters. "She's right. Your wife might be your best strategist." Peters came to me later, found me alone in our bedroom staring at my reflection. Bruised face, ice-cold eyes I barely recognized. His composure finally cracked. He pressed his forehead against my shoulder, and I felt him shake. This man who'd ordered deaths without flinching now breaking under the weight of what protecting me cost. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry you're in this." Stories like this, about love forged in fire, about choosing your partner even when the world burns, these resonate because they're raw and real. If you're feeling the complexity of Sharon's choice, drop a comment below telling me, could you stand beside someone like Peters? And subscribe, because we explore these impossible moral questions together. Now back to the breaking point. Federal investigation opened. Peters' legitimate associates grew nervous. Pressure mounted to end this before authorities connected dots they couldn't ignore. Byrne had fortified himself in an Irish stronghold in Hell's Kitchen. Getting to him would be bloody. But Peters was done waiting. Declan Byrne requested a meeting. Peters laughed for a full minute, a sound without humor that made Henrik shift uncomfortably. We were in the study, dawn breaking over Manhattan, when the call came through on speaker. "Mr. Van Dyke, I'm proposing a resolution." Byrne's Irish accent was smooth, practiced. Substantial compensation for the misunderstanding. $2 million. We renegotiate territory boundaries, everyone walks away. "You touched my wife," Peters said, his voice deadly calm. "There's no price for that. Be reasonable. This ends in bodies on both sides, including hers eventually if you keep pushing." I stood frozen in the doorway, watching Peters' expression turn to stone. He ended the call without responding, then looked at me. "He's desperate. Good. In our world, you don't compromise after someone hurts yours," Henrik explained when I didn't speak. "It shows weakness. Every enemy you have will test the same boundary." "So more people die because of what happened to me?" The question came out quieter than I intended. Peters crossed to me, his hands gentle on my shoulders despite the violence he was orchestrating. "They made the choice when they came for you. Every person Byrne employed knew the risks. This is justice in my world." Justice or revenge? Both. Strategic necessity. He studied my face, reading the conflict there. "This is who I am, Sharon. This is what being my wife means. If you can't accept that—" "I'm trying to accept it," I interrupted. "I'm just struggling with how many people pay the price for protecting me." Byrne's countermove came 6 hours later. 3 of Peters' shipping containers intercepted, millions in contraband seized, a warehouse fire in Newark, financial damage mounting while federal investigators circled closer. Henrik fielded calls from Peters' associates, their concerns barely veiled. "Is Van Dyck's wife really worth starting a war?" one asked on speaker. "The Irish will back down if he shows flexibility." "She's not just his wife," Henrik said coldly. "She's his line in the sand. Anyone questioning that can find new business partners." But the pressure mounted. Peters grew quieter, more isolated, making calculations. I watched him hate. Finally, he came to me in our bedroom, his expression carefully neutral. I've arranged a secure location, Switzerland. You leave tonight with 2 of my best men. This ends when Byrne is eliminated, then you come home. No. The word came out flat, absolute. Sharon, this isn't negotiable. I'm not running. I'm not hiding. Not anymore. His control cracked. You think I can focus on ending this while worrying if Byrne's people are coming for you? You think I can make the decisions I need to make knowing you're in the crossfire? You married me. My voice rose to match his. Not a possession you protect like property. Not something you can lock away when it becomes inconvenient. You married a partner, Peters, and partners don't abandon each other when things get hard. I'm trying to keep you alive. I'm already dead if I leave. If I run now, I'll spend the rest of my life running. This is my fight, too. We faced each other across our bedroom, the city glittering below, and I saw him struggling between the man who needed control and the husband who'd promised to respect me. I can't lose you, he said finally, voice breaking. Then let me stand with you. We said things that night we couldn't take back. The argument that started in our bedroom spilled into the living room, 3 years of unspoken tensions finally erupting while Henrik tactfully withdrew, and Peter's security pretended not to hear. You want a wife or a prisoner? I demanded, my voice raw, because right now you're treating me like something you own, not someone you love. I want you alive. Peters slammed his hand against the wall. I want to know you're safe while I'm hunting the man who ordered your beating. Is that so unreasonable? Yes. When it means stripping away every choice I have, when it means deciding for me like I'm a child who can't assess risk. I stepped closer, refusing to back down. If you can't respect my decisions, then maybe I should leave. Not to Switzerland. Leave you entirely. The threat landed like a physical blow. Peters went still, his face draining of color. You don't mean that, don't I? What's the point of staying in a marriage where I have no autonomy, where every decision is made for me under the guise of protection? I can't lose you. His voice broke. I've lost too many people, Sharon. I can't. He stopped, turned away, but I'd already seen the cracks in his armor. Who did you lose? Silence stretched between us. Finally, Peters spoke, his back still to me. Her name was Anna, my first wife. 15 years ago, during a territorial dispute in Amsterdam. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. A car bomb meant for me killed her instead. The revelation hit me like cold water. Peters, I promised myself I'd never let it happen again, never put someone I loved in the crossfire, and then I married you, and I broke that promise. He turned, and I saw raw pain in his eyes. Every decision I make is haunted by her death, by the fact that I couldn't protect her. I'm not her. I crossed to him, took his face in my hands, and you can't save me by locking me away. That's not protection, that's prison. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Protect you and respect you simultaneously. You learn. We both learn. Together. I held his gaze. I'll accept enhanced security, full transparency about threats, whatever reasonable precautions we need, but I stay, Peters. I stand with you. He pulled me against him, careful of my healing ribs, his forehead pressed to mine. If something happens to you, it won't. Not if we're smart. Not if we're partners. Henrik's urgent knock shattered the moment. Boss, we have a situation. Byrne had hit Peter's main warehouse. 3 men dead, significant product destroyed. Henrik himself had taken a bullet defending the shipment. Shoulder wound already bandaged, but his face was grim. Peters looked between Henrik and me, torn between retaliation and staying. Go, I said firmly. Finish this. I'll be here when you get back, I promise. Sharon, I promise, Peters. Now go end this war. He kissed me hard, desperately, then left with Henrik. And I stood alone in our penthouse, watching the city below, knowing everything would be different by morning. Peters left at midnight. By dawn, Declan Byrne was kneeling in front of him. The assault on the Irish stronghold had been swift, brutal, overwhelming. Everything Peters had spent 48 hours planning, executed with surgical precision. Henrik called me at 6 a.m., his voice steady despite the gunfire I could hear in the background. "It's done. We have Byrne." "Where?" I asked, already reaching for my coat. "The warehouse." "But Sharon, you don't need to. Text me the address." Peters was waiting when I arrived, his expression unreadable as I stepped out of the armored SUV he'd sent. Blood spattered his shirt. His knuckles were split, but his eyes were clear, focused, and when he saw me, something like relief crossed his face. "You shouldn't be here," he said, but there was no force behind it. "Yes, I should." Declan Byrne knelt in the center of the warehouse, hands zip-tied, face bloodied from the assault that had captured him. His eyes tracked me as I entered, and I saw him make the calculation. This woman he'd ordered beaten was the reason his empire was burning. Mrs. Van Dyke. His voice was thick with Irish accent and blood. "You've caused quite the stir." "You thought I was a message," I said, standing beside Peters, our shoulders touching. "I'm his purpose. There's a difference." Peters' hand found mine, squeezed once. Then he addressed Byrne with that terrifying calm I'd learned meant death was imminent. "You could have challenged me directly. Territory disputes I understand. Business I respect. But you made it about her. That's where you miscalculated." Byrne laughed, wet and ugly. "She's made you more dangerous, not less. I underestimated what a man will do for... She's made me remember what I'm fighting for." Peters interrupted. "Everything I built, every decision I make, it has to mean something beyond just power. She gives it meaning." He looked at me. "This is your choice, Sharon. What happens to him? I'll respect whatever you decide." I stared at Byrne, this man whose order had left me bleeding on concrete, and felt the complexity of wanting him dead while understanding what that made me. Complicit, judge, executioner's partner. "Do what you need to do," I said finally, "but not because of me, not for revenge. Do it because your empire requires it, because letting him live makes you weak in this world you've built." Peters studied my face, then nodded slowly. "Henrik, take Mrs. Van Dyke to the car." I didn't hear the gunshot. Didn't need to. By the time Peters emerged 20 minutes later, wiping his hands on a cloth Henrik provided, the Irish operations were already being absorbed or destroyed. Territory reclaimed, message sent throughout the underworld. The city quieted. Federal investigation found nothing. Peters' connections too deep, evidence too carefully managed. Media reported gang leader missing, presumed fled. Peters came home at 8 a.m. exhausted and blood-free in fresh clothes. He found me on our terrace, watching the sun rise over a city that would never look the same. "It's over," he said. "You're safe." I turned to him. I was never really in danger. Not with you. 6 weeks later, I traded my art curator job for director of Van Dyke Foundation. The transition was seamless on paper. Wealthy wife taking on philanthropic role, leveraging husband's resources for charitable causes. The reality was more complex. I learned how foundations could launder money, legitimize questionable income, create networks of influence that served both humanitarian goals and criminal enterprise simultaneously. Peters taught me. Henrik taught me. I sat in meetings with accountants who asked no questions and lawyers who specialized in creative interpretations of tax law. The Van Dyke Foundation funded children's hospitals and also provided cover for shipping routes that moved more than medical supplies. I trained with Peters' security team 3 mornings a week. Self-defense, situational awareness, how to recognize threats before they materialized. My body, fully healed now, learned new muscle memory, how to break a hold, where to strike to disable an attacker, how to move through crowds while cataloging exits and potential weapons. The first meeting with another crime family, I sat beside Peters as his equal. Russian oligarch, legitimate oil money fronting less legitimate operations, and his eyes assessed me with new respect when Peters introduced me as his partner, not his wife. The message spread through the underworld. Sharon Van Dyke wasn't a weakness to exploit. She was an extension of Peters' power. Attacking her meant war. Emma stopped calling after the third unanswered voicemail. I saw her once accidentally at a coffee shop in Soho. She looked at me like I was a stranger, and maybe I was. The Sharon who'd been her friend didn't exist anymore, replaced by someone who attended charity galas with a concealed carry permit and knew the street value of heroin shipments. I didn't mourn the loss as much as I thought I would. Peters stood on our penthouse rooftop at sunset, 6 weeks after Burns' elimination, and I joined him with news that would change everything again. I took his hand, placed it on my stomach where the smallest curve was just beginning to show. I'm pregnant. We're having a daughter. His expression cycled through shock, joy, terror in rapid succession. Sharon, are you afraid? I asked quietly. For her? For what we're bringing her into. Every day, he admitted, his hand spreading protectively over where our daughter grew. This world, this life, it's dangerous, violent, not what I'd choose for a child if I had the choice. But we can protect her, together, teach her to navigate it with eyes wide open. Eyes wide open, he repeated, pulling me against him. All of us. Always. Sharon's transformation from denial to acceptance is complete, but this is just one story in a world of dangerous men, powerful women, and the impossible choices they make together. Subscribe for more dark romance stories where love doesn't save you from violence. It teaches you how to survive it together. We stood there as night fell over Manhattan, the city spreading below us in glittering promise and threat. Our empire, beautiful, dangerous, ours, built on blood and legitimized through foundations and shipping routes and alliances forged in violence. Our daughter would inherit this world, but she'd inherit parents who'd learned that true partnership meant facing darkness together, not one shielding the other from reality. I was no longer the woman who'd attended galas alone, pretending ignorance was safety. I was Sharon Stoner Van Dyke, fully integrated into my husband's world, choosing it deliberately with every decision I made, and I wouldn't have it any other way.